So now we're able to select different users and see their tasks. But of course, the add task and complete buttons don't do anything yet. And that's therefore what we'll add next. However, before we do that, there's one other improvement I'd like to make on this application. I'd like to make it very clear which user was selected. Sure, we can see the name here, but if we scroll down, for example, we don't really see it anymore. And it would simply be nice if the currently active user would be highlighted here on the left. And we can implement this feature by going to the user component HTML file, or to the user component CSS file actually first. And in there you'll see that I prepared a CSS class, an active class, that could be added to an element to give it this highlighted look. So in order to make a user look highlighted and selected, we should conditionally add that CSS class to that button here if the user is selected. Therefore, as a first step, we need to find out whether a user is selected or not. And we actually already have that information in the app component. There we know which user with which ID is selected. And we then even compute the selected user like this. Therefore, to implement this highlighting feature, we can go back to the user component TypeScript file and add another new input here. An input property that I'll name selected. And the type should be Boolean, so true or false. I also want to make this required so that it must be set. And therefore I can add this exclamation mark to convince TypeScript that this will be set. Now, back in the app component template, we have to add this selected property here and set it equal to true or false. And of course, I want to dynamically derive whether it's true or false. And that's fairly straightforward to do because, as mentioned, we're storing the selected user ID here in the app component. And in the app component template, we're looping through all users. So selected will be true if the ID of the user we're currently looking at in this loop is equal to that selected user ID. And otherwise we'll get false here because it's then not the selected user we're outputting here. But with that, we're passing this selected property or this value for this selected property to this user component. Now we can use this selected property in the template of this user component to conditionally add that CSS class. And if you wanna add a class conditionally to an element, which is a rather common scenario, you can do that with a special binding, a special property binding syntax. Instead of binding the class property as a whole, you bind class dot and then the name of the class you want to conditionally add, for example, active. And then you set this equal to a true or false value, which determines whether this class will be added. So in this case, the selected property, which holds true or false. And that's all. With that, this active CSS class is added to this button if selected is true. If we save that, you see initially nothing's selected, but if I click on a user, now you see it stays in that highlighted mode. Not just when I hover over it, but also after I clicked on it. And that's now the behavior I want here. So now as a next step, I'd like to make this complete button here work. So that when we click it, the task is removed. That is what completing a task should mean in this demo application. And therefore, we have to go to this task component template because it's in there where we have this complete button. and we have to add a click listener on it so that we can find out whether this button was clicked or not. And then, of course, we want to communicate this information that this button in this component was clicked to the tasks component, which is where we're managing all these tasks. Hence, in the task component, which manages a single task, we have to add an output so that we can emit our own custom event there. With help of the output decorator that's imported from Angular core, and then I'll give this property a name of complete, and the value, as you learned it before, is a new event emitter, which must be imported from @Angular core. Now we can add a method to this task component. For example, a method called onCompleteTask or anything like that. And here we use this complete property to emit a new value. And now again, we might want to share some information with the parent component, so we could emit this.task.id here. Now, just as before with the select event on the user component, you should also add this extra type annotation here on event emitter when emitting this complete event. Here I'm about to emit such an ID, which is of type string, so therefore we should add string between angle brackets here. And with that, we got our custom complete output here. Now we can use that in the parent component of the task component, so in the tasks component, to listen to that event here on the app task element. Here we can now listen to this complete event and then trigger any method of our choice. So here I'll simply add such a method then in the tasks component class, and I'll name it onCompleteTask. The name is up to you, but here I know that I will then get the ID of the task that was completed as an argument, and that it will be of type string, and we can then later add our code here. In the tasks component template file, it's therefore onCompleteTask that should be triggered, and we should forward that emitted data as described, so therefore we pass $event here. This special variable that's made available by Angular that gives us access to the event data that was emitted. In the task component HTML file, we can now also complete the code and bind our click listener on the complete button to onCompleteTask in this component. And in this task component, onCompleteTask then does not want any input, so we can simply call it like this with an empty pair of parentheses here. Now with that, we're emitting the event. We're of course not doing anything with it though. In the tasks component, we got no real code that would do anything with that ID. And that of course should now change, because the goal now is to update this list of tasks and to remove the task that was marked as completed. And this can be achieved by setting this tasks here equal to this tasks filter. So to a filtered version of this tasks array. And this filtered version will be the old tasks array without that task that has this ID. That's the idea here. So therefore, filter takes this function I explained earlier, and we get the individual task here, and we want to return true if the ID of the task we're looking at is not equal to the ID we received here. Because if it is equal, it is the task that should be removed. So we want to return false for that task so that it's dropped. And therefore now with this done, if you go back, you should be able to select a user, click complete, and the task is gone. And the other tasks on the other user are still there, though we can of course also complete those until all tasks are completed. And that's therefore another major step towards completing this first demo application.